So the two countries, U.S. and South Korea, have started another round of military drill this Monday. The president of South Korea has quickly called this purely defensive. But many say that this could just escalate the tension even more. I want to first get your thoughts on this. Let's start with the parties involved. Professor Chung first. Give us the South Korean perspective.
In essence, it is not, unfortunately, defensive. As we know, as everybody knows, last 70 years, what the U.S. has done with regard to the Korean Peninsula, particularly with the DPRK, the North Korea. In fact, the president of South Korea, the ROK, doesn't have any military political independence. I'm sorry to say that. No matter what he says, it is the United States will decide regard the military or the nuclear, the military drills. But what it is, the UFG, the military drills, will elevate the whole military tension in Korean Peninsula. I don't think that the DPRK, the Pyongyang government, will sit idle. Mm-hmm. I think they will do something with regard to the re-engaging in the military drills in the Korean Peninsula.
Mr. O'Hanlon, your thoughts on this?
Well, I'm afraid that I have to disagree strongly with my Chinese friend. In fact, I'm a little surprised to hear him put things that way. Normally, I hear a more balanced view from Chinese counterparts. If we want to go back in history,
that was actually Professor from South Korea representing South Korean perspective.
I'm Korean.
Oh, I'm sorry. Well, then I will disagree anyway. But I'm glad you clarified that. I'm very glad you clarified that, because the notion that the United States bears responsibility for the fundamental state of hostilities on the Korean Peninsula is frankly ridiculous. And I think we need to get beyond ridiculous comments if we're going to make any constructive progress. There is plenty of room to debate whether we should still be doing these kinds of exercises and what diplomatic approaches we should take. But the United States came to the rescue of South Korea in 1950, and we have stood by them ever since as they built an amazing democracy. And they have complete freedom and sovereignty, and they know that very well. So to me, the U.S.-ROK alliance is one of the most remarkable accomplishments in the world for both countries, for both the United States and South Korea. And we are still threatened by a North Korean regime that treats its people worse than any other government on earth, or at least certainly in the top 5 worst regimes, that continues to spend 25% of its GDP on its military. Under these circumstances, to blame the United States fundamentally for the state of hostilities is frankly not constructive.
Professor Chung, I saw you shaking your head. Do you want to respond to what's been said there?
Who is the real provocateur in this whole, not only in Korean Peninsula, around the whole world? Who holds the most number of the nuclear warheads than any other nation on earth? Is the United States. And the U.S. destroyed the Korean Peninsula in 1950-53 war. Everybody knows about it. 1/3 of population of the North was wiped out.
That's absurd.
So listen, gentlemen. What we are talking about in a free discussion. So what I'm saying, the U.S. is finally come to an end. I hope the Washington comes to an end to not anymore the divide and conquer strategy in Korean Peninsula. Let the Korean people in both sides to come to find some peaceful solution. And we want to find some self-determined peaceful solution, not anymore dictated by the Washington power. As everybody knows, it is the United States who control the whole South Korean population in terms of the military control. The Pentagon's the full spectrum dominance has continued for 70 years. Everybody knows about it, no matter what the gentleman in Washington says. That's the fact. That's the fact.
Mr. O'Hanlon, how would you respond?
Are you in Seoul or in Pyongyang? No, this is absolutely absurd.
The Korean,
when I talk to
South Korea,
my South Korean friend has any support in.
There is only one Korea, Mr. Gentleman. There's no
my
two
friend in
Koreas.
South Korea has very few. I thought I was asked a question, sir. Sir, I thought I was asked a question.
There is only one Korea.
I don't think my friend in South Korea has virtually any support in his own country. Ma'am, are you going to let us both speak over each other, or do we want to make this a little bit more
go ahead,
regulated?
Mr. O'Hanlon,
I have a point I'd like to make, and then I'll stop. If my friend... Thank you.
Make your point, Mr. O'Hanlon,
I would appreciate it if my
please.
friend in Seoul would let me finish my point. There is very, very little support in South Korea for the viewpoint that my friend in Seoul has put forth because it is historically wrong, and he knows it.
You are not Korean. You never know about the Korean people. You do not know about how Koreans think about the United States of America.
How
So
many
I get the
Koreans agree
sense
with
that,
you?
is this a general sense there in South Korea that people there are not entirely satisfied with the way that the U.S. is dealing with its crisis? Somehow, does it feel that it got bypassed somehow, or does it want to take full control of its defense? Is it about this?
I mean, even the operational control on the army or Korean military is not at the hands of the Korean president. It's at the hands of the U.S., the commander in South Korea. How would you say the Korean people have independence from Washington power? No one can miss the gentleman from Washington. What can you say about the U.S. control on Korean Peninsula? Let us find our own way to bring about the peaceful reunification, not anymore for the sake of the U.S. interest in Korean Peninsula issues.
All right, let's bring in a third perspective on this. Let's bring in Professor Wang on this. How do you view this, the gap
he asked me a question.
of this understanding?
He asked me a question.
Well, I think the debate between my Korean friends and the American friend indicated very clearly that the real problem of the North Korea, the so-called North Korea problem, is not between China and South Korea or United States. It's between Koreans with Americans. There's some Chinese thinking that why the United States not take the North Korea issue as the diplomatic agenda for many years. Only recently, to show some muscles in these Korean Peninsula, because some Americans they need actually the threat, so-called threat from the north, for the excuse for the deploy of the Saddam missile defense system in South Korea, to, as you said, to control more intensively on the South Korean side. Even they want to do similar things in Japan, even other. So to make China felt that the United States is really want to solve the problem of the North Korea, or just want to keep the tension to have that strategic purpose to serve to the global missile defense system.
And earlier when we were discussing this, you said that the U.S. and South Korea go into these drills with different intentions. Talk to us more about these.
Yeah, actually, from the North Korea side, their thing about the threat is from the U.S. or the U.S. alliance with South Korea or with Japan. So who is provocative? The North Korea consider you are provocative, and of course the American side said every time they identify North Korea as a provocative, and even blame China not take responsible in and calm down the North Korea's tensions. But actually, this is not the egg and chicken problems. Everybody blame each other. But to be frankly, North Korea don't feel so safe to open reform. But so we need security guarantee from U.S. side, particularly from the U.S. side, for the North Korea.
But what is the U.S. worst fear?
The U.S. very worried about is not a nuclear North Korea, but North Korea used the nuclear weapons in the long term to deter U.S. to not interfere in the affairs of the Korean Peninsula, and then united the whole Korean Peninsula, and then let the Americans military go. That's the Americans very worried about that.
Mr. O'Hanlon, do you agree that's the biggest concern from the United States? It is not about the worries of the DPRK really hitting continental U.S., but the worry that the DPRK might use military means to reunify the peninsula and drive out U.S. forces stationed there, of course.
If the Korean Peninsula is, if the Korean Peninsula is reunified in a way that Koreans are happy with, the Americans will be very happy to leave. And in fact, my South Korean friend should know that if a majority of his fellow countrymen ever felt the way he does, we will leave. And by the way, when we leave, this time we aren't coming back, because Korea is a very exposed part of the Eurasian Peninsula, or Eurasian landmass. The reason we are there is for reasons of history and commitment to our ally and steadfastness in support of the South Korean democracy. If the South Koreans ever want us to leave, we will leave the same way we left the Philippines, the same way we've left other countries when we were asked to leave. But South Koreans need to know, if that happens, we aren't coming back once they get in trouble. They better be ready to handle the situation on their own. My Chinese friend is wrong to think that somehow the most important thing for the United States is to have forces in Korea. The reason we have them there is to defend South Korea. We have forces in Japan for regional and global power projection. That is true. The forces in Japan have a global role. The forces in Korea are there to defend Korea. And that is not a particularly essential mission for any other American national security interest. So if the Korean Peninsula could ever be reunified, we would be happy to see that happen. And if we're ever asked to leave, we will leave.
Professor Chow, I'll let you respond.
Yeah, I mean, even James Clapper, the former director of the NSA, most recently in June 26 in South Korea, called for there's no more denuclearization. It's already over. The game is over. And he called for even the interest section should be set in Washington and Pyongyang to talk about the peaceful solution. And he finally called for the peace treaty is the only solution. Not only James Clapper, but also William the Perry, the George Shultz, and all the former defense and intelligence high officials called for peaceful solution. Now even at the latest last week, the Steve Bannon from the White House called for the U.S. troops out of Korea may be the answer, the final answer to find some peaceful solution. As you mentioned, the DPRK has been threatened by the U.S., the nuclear power in the world, the last 60-some years, and they came up as a last resort to build their own, the self-defensive as a nuclear deterrent power. That's the only reason why they built their own independent, the self-defense measure to stop the U.S. from further the aggressive actions as they did the last 60-some years. So, but by now I'm much more optimistic. The Washington and the Pyongyang will find some solution, peaceful solution, rather than the nuclear war in Korean Peninsula.
Wang, what would it take to negotiate a permanent peace treaty on the Korean Peninsula?
Let me further continue your discussion with the American counterpart. American counterpart always claim that the U.S. airlines is want to defend of your democracy.
Not at all.
So what's the top priority for the Korean people? Democracy, stability, peace, and unification, what?
Is a self-determined reunification. That's what the Koreans, not only in
and
South...
then the U.S. is obscures all the hope for your...
U.S. has not, if I can be frankly speaking, if I'm allowed, U.S. has not been supportive of our self-determined peaceful reunification. The U.S., the traditional strategy, I don't think that my friend in Washington may agree with me, but it's the divide and conquer strategy has ruled our Korean Peninsula. And then from the Korean War, more than 4 million population, only less than 30 million population wiped out. And we do not want any more war in Korean Peninsula. We hope the peaceful solution for the Korean, and not only in Korea, but also around the world.
I can't agree with you more. China and South Korea are the most important neighbor of the North Korea. So we feel more uncomfortable about the North Korea situation, either nuclear or missile tests. So U.S. far away from North Korea and the Korean Peninsula. So even the military exercises, again and again. So it's very close to China's territory, and the missile defense system SAD is also very it's a challenge for China's national security. So China and South Korea should work together to negotiate to help the North Korea bring back to the negotiation table. As you said, the peace treaty. Maybe peace treaty is long term because now North Korea and the United States they even have not diplomatic relations, not recognize each other. Now still the civil war still continued, actually, to be frankly. So we should first to stop kind of this intention escalation situation to make a common security guaranteed mechanism in the Korean Peninsula.
Mr. O'Hanlon, let me give you a chance to respond to, the U.S. divide and conquer strategy. I want to hear your thoughts on this.
Well, first, I have a lot of problems with my South Korean friend on this show. Historically speaking, it's offensive to say the United States killed a third of the North Korean population. We came to the defense of South Korea when asked, and we have stayed there ever since we were asked. He seems to forget who started the Korean War. It was North Korea. It was not South Korea. It was not the United States. And it was not China, although China did come in on North Korea's side later that year. So we have to remember the history a little bit here to know what caused this in the first place. However, I do agree with my counterparts, and I thought the show today actually was going to be about going forward and trying to find a peaceful solution. I'm very happy to discuss how we best do that. I agree 100% with them. Frankly, starting a show with such incredibly historically inaccurate depictions of how we got here is not constructive for figuring out how to go forward. So we have to think about peaceful ways going forward. We are not interested in dividing and conquering. I think it's important for a Chinese host of this kind of a show to understand and explain to viewers that the South Korean you have on today does not speak for his country. The vast majority of South Koreans disagree very strongly, which is why there is still a US-ROK alliance, because they want our help to protect against North Korea. Yes, there are disagreements over how to pursue some kind of a peaceful resolution, but those are disagreements among friends who begin with the basic premise that we must face a ruthless enemy with deterrence and strength.
Let me just get back to the military exercises for a moment here. The military exercises we're talking about will run through the end of the month, and they will involve computer simulations as well as 17,500 U.S. troops with other South Korean allies also joining this year. Australia, Britain, Canada, Colombia, the Netherlands, and New Zealand. So, Professor Wang, what does the scale and participation of allies tell you about these drills?
Well, these drills, in the eyes of the Americans, want to show the leadership. They kept their allied system strongly, and then not just deter the North Korea from go further. Actually, it's also signals to other countries like China, Russia, and others to show the U.S. is not people back to United States and not American first, but it still have the capacity and applications to protect the allies.
Professor Chung, your thoughts on this? Final remarks? We're running out of time.
It's a show of force from the Washington, but the U.S., the Washington, they apparently decided to scale it down. The 7,500 number was cut down from the last year, and the computer the simulation, the war, the game, rather than the real action game. So there's apparently there's a sign from Washington to try to cool it down, the whole situation. But we do not know yet, the DPRK, how they will react to that. But no matter what, it is my hope and wish that the peaceful solution will be achieved by any means necessary by everybody involved in this whole process.
Peaceful solution is all we are trying to achieve here. We can all agree on. But thank you to you all.